أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا واللعنة دائمة الباقية لأعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم وغاصب حقوقهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم ولا تتمنوا ما فضل الله به بعضكم على بعض للرجال نصيب مما اكتسبوا وللنساء نصيب مما اكتسبنا صلوات عليك برا Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you in expressing your love for the Ahlul Bayt based on the ayat of Mawadda, where we have gathered this evening to celebrate the birth anniversary of the first granddaughter of the Prophet of Islam, Hazrat Zainab bint Ali wa Fatema salawatullah alayhim ajma'een. I recited an ayat from Surah An-Nisa, the chapter which deals with women. And this is the Wiladat of a lady in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by saying, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. The address is to the men and the women. Do not compete against one another. Do not fight against one another for what Allah has given to you. Because the men will get the reward of what they do, and the women will get the reward of what they do. And so this ayat basically is telling us that before Islam, or even when Islam came, or even now, there will be tension in the society, where there will be, to some extent, fight between men and women. Especially in the era of women's liberation movement, this ayat becomes more relevant to us. Keeping in mind that tonight is the Wiladat of the Lady of Islam and Shiaism, the Lady of Karbala. I would like to talk about the controversy that we heard about it in the Toronto media over the weekend. There is a book written by a Sunni alim long time ago in Urdu. The alim has died many decades before. A very famous book about family life, which was translated into English, available for many years. All of a sudden, somebody discovered that book in the Islamic store on Ziarat Street. And they looked at it, and one part of it talks about how the husband should control his wife. And they're talking about this ayat from Surah An-Nisa, ayat number 32. And this became, and then they gave it to the media, and this is where we see that this has become an opportunity of bashing the Muslims and creating more fodder for Islamophobia in Canada. That look at these Muslims, and so all Muslim husbands who abuse their wives, their action is now attributed to Islam and Quran. When we look at this issue, we realize that yes, there is an ayat in Quran, and we need to carefully look at it. This mahfil is not the opportunity for that. Inshallah, in one of the Wednesday classes, we will exclusively deal with this ayat. With children here and the Wiladat, Jashan and celebration there, this is not the right mood to discuss about this ayat. But I'll say one thing. To those who are against Islam and Muslims in this part of the world, who look for excuse, in order to tarnish the image of Islam in Quran and the Muslim, world, they do not look at how Muslims, study the Quran. What is their explanation of those ayat and how they have implemented those ayat in their lives across the centuries. They just look for the excuse. And this is where, when we look at the actions of a community, we are not allowed to look at the actions of a segment of a religious community and blame the religion for it, whether it is a Jewish community or a Christian community or a Muslim community. It doesn't matter. Unfortunately, when a Christian or a Jewish husband abuses the wife, they are just Canadians or, normal citizens doing this. It becomes a criminal issue. But when a Muslim husband does that, it's not just an issue of an individual citizen doing this. Oh, this is because Islam has asked them to do it. And this is where we have the problem of trying to blame whatever Muslims, bad people in the Muslim society do, immediately to link that with Islam and Quran. This is absolutely unfair. Means if we really go by the same, criteria, and we start, blaming this labeling game or blaming game, we also can find many, many things in the biblical sources and blame Judaism or Christianity for it. And I'll just give you one example. This can be done, and this can be done very easily. When we look at the issue of subjugation of women. This is what we are told, that Islam is promoting the subjugation of women, the suppression of women. Well, if I look at the Christian world, and if I would like to, link this issue of subjugation of the women, I can go to the Bible, to the New Testament, and look at one of the letters written by St. Paul, was considered to be the founder of the Christian church. You will see, for example, he says, a woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I don't permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She must be silent. I can take that letter, that sentence from St. Paul's advice to the Christians, and say, see, this subjugation of women, even in a limited form that we see in this society, I blame it on Christianity. I wouldn't do that. And just as I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't blame Bible and Christianity for that, I expect fairness from the other side. Muslims, those who do this to their wives, abuse their wives, until this women liberation groups started, highlighting this ayat, probably they didn't even know about it. Now it's being misused. And so this is the problem that we have to keep in mind. We wouldn't do it, but we have to realize that all, religious communities suffer from the problem where their followers do not fully implement their religious values in their lives. The problem that we have is basically the ideal preached in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is not exactly being practiced by the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims. Neither the Christians are totally faithful to the Bible, nor the Jewish people are totally faithful to the Torah, nor the Muslims are totally faithful to their religious values. And so if someone from any of this community does something wrong, do not blame the religion. The problem is of ignorance. The problem is of their own desires. The problem is of cultural values against religious values. And this is the problem that we have, that, whenever a Muslim does something, immediately it is Islam which is blamed for the evil doing of some of the Muslims. Salawat. The ayat of Surah An-Nisa is very clear. There is no need for men and women to compete against one another or fight against one another for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to them. It's not a man versus women issue in Islam. Islam is not talking about genders fighting against one another. Actually, when we talk about genders, to be masculine or feminine has no value in Islam at all. It's not a fazilat. It is not a quality or a virtue for a man to say, because I am a man, therefore I am superior to the woman. And not even the other way around. These issues don't have any bearing on the fazilat, the virtue and preference of a human being. When you look at the issues which are very important in Islam, when we talk about Iman, when we talk about spirituality, when we talk about getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we talk about taqwa, when we talk about seeking of knowledge, these are the faza'il, these are the virtues in which there is no difference in Islam between the male and the female. Salawat par de akbar. Two important scholars of this era in the Shia world have explained this whole issue by using some very simple terms. One is Shaheed Murtaza Mutahiri in his book on women's rights, where he talks about the difference between equality and similarity. He says the problem with the Western culture is that it considers equality to be similarity. In Islam, we believe that men and women are equal, but equality does not mean similarity. Another term which helps this issue is the concept developed about 15 years ago by Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli, who is still alive in Qom now. And he talks about this issue of difference between the virtues of a human being and the duties of the human being. He says, wherever you talk about the qualities and virtues in a human being, there is absolutely no difference between male and female. Wherever you see differences in Islamic laws, it has to do with duties and not with faza'il and virtues. And if you can, imbibe these concepts in that way, it becomes very easy to understand what Islam stands for and to share it with those who are not educated about the Islamic values. Look at the ayat of Quran from Surah Al-Ahzab, ayat number 35, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way goes out of his way. Quran mostly, as far as the language is concerned, uses masculine tone. This is how the books were written those days. And that was the norm as far as speech is concerned. But there are places in Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes out of his way to repeat the same concept in masculine and feminine form, to emphasize the point that when it comes to the faza'il, virtues of human beings, there is no difference in the potential of the male or the female. And look at this ayat. إِنَّ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالْمُسْلِمَاتِ وَالْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ وَالْقَانِتِينَ وَالْقَانِتَاتِ وَالصَّادِقِينَ وَالصَّادِقَاتِ وَالصَّابِرِينَ وَالصَّابِرَاتِ وَالْخَاشِعِينَ وَالْخَاشِعَاتِ وَالْمُتَصَدِّقِينَ وَالْمُتَصَدِّقَاتِ وَالسَّائِمِينَ وَالسَّائِمَاتِ وَالْحَافِظِينَ فُرُوجَهُمْ وَالْحَافِظَاتِ وَالذَّاكِرِينَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا وَالذَّاكِرَاتِ. Even I'm getting tired. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have said that without repeating it twice. He could have just said, إِنَّ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْقَانِتِينَ وَالصَّادِقِينَ وَالصَّابِرِينَ وَالْخَاشِعِينَ, and it would have applied to all Muslims, male and female. But here, for every virtue, Allah goes into masculine form and that feminine form. Just to emphasize that when it comes to Islam and Iman and obedience to Allah and truthfulness and patience and sabr, when it comes to humility and to be charitable and to fast and the issue of being chaste in your attitude and to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in all these faza'il and virtues, there is no difference in the potential of the men or the women. Salawat pढ़ने एक बार और. Four places in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about the good deeds of the people, again He goes out of His way. وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ, whoever does good deeds. Whoever applies to everyone, men as well as women. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to make it very clear. وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنْثَى, whether that doer of good deeds is a male or a female, وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ, provided he is a mu'min, فَأُولَٰئِكَ يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةِ, they will enter the Jannah. And Allah will not be unjust to them. This concept has been repeated with these words, where dhakarin wa unsa has been repeated 4 times in the Quran. And this is where we come to realize that in Islam, when it comes to the virtue of a good deed, it is not the gender which counts, it is the condition of Iman in the message of Rasulullah, which is the criteria of acceptance by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat. Even when we talk about the issue of, importance of daughter versus son or the other way around, again, if we want to play the blame game, we can look at the Bible and bring things out of it and blame Christianity and Judaism for it. But we don't do it. But still, I'll give you the example that how, the media has been really unfair to us on this issue. For example, if you look at the Jewish part of the Bible, when they talk about the time when the mother goes through the period of ritual impurity after the birth of the child, that period in Jewish laws for a woman becomes double if she gives birth to a girl compared to the time when she gives birth to a boy. Whereas in Islam, it's same. Whether the birth was of a male or a female, that period, which is known as the period of ritual impurity, is same. If you look at the Catholic Bible, the New Testament, you will see again there is a phrase which says, the birth of a daughter is a loss. We don't hear about it. And if we see somebody, looks at this society in that way, we can, if we want to play the same game, we can immediately say, well, it's part of your religious teachings. This is your religious value. We don't do that. Actually, I can even go further if I want to play that game. And I can say, well, Judaism and Christianity existed before Islam. And so when I look at the pre-Islamic Arab society, and when I look at the Arabs, that they hated their own daughters, they considered it to be a disgrace to be informed that the wife has given birth to a female child. I can say, well, maybe they learned from the Bible, from the Christians and the Jews. Because this existed before. It was Islam which came and changed the mentality on this issue among the Arabs. If you look at the ayat from Surah number 16, 58 and 59, وَإِذَا بُشِّرَ أَحَدُهُمْ بِالْأُنْثَى, where the Quran says that when a person was informed about the birth of a female child in his family, ظَلَّ وَجْهُهُ مُسْوَدًّا وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. His face will turn dark out of anger. يَتَوَارَى مِنَ الْقَوْمِ مِنْ سُوءِ مَا بُشِّرَ بِهِ. He will start hiding from the people because of the shame which has come upon him. أَيُمْسِكُهُ عَلَى حَوْنٍ أَمْ يَدُسُّهُ فِي التُّرَابِ. And he starts thinking, how do I get rid of this disgrace in form of the girl that my wife has, given birth to? Do I maintain this do I live with this disgrace, or do I bury it in the earth? This is where they used to, bury their daughters alive. أَلَا سَاءَ مَا يَحْكُمُونَ. Quran says they were very evil in these kinds of thoughts. And so if we want to play a game here, we can say, well, this Jahiliyyah tradition of the Arabs probably was influenced by biblical teachings and the ideas that we see in the Bible. But we don't do that. We believe that probably Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, although He gave male children to the Prophet, but none of them survived. Maybe one of the reasons was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to bring about a social revolution in that society. That the only surviving child of the Prophet was a daughter. And when we look at the birth of Fatema al-Zahra salawatullah alayha, and Bibi Zainab, we see that these events were not only family issue for the Prophet's family. These issues were very relevant in changing the minds and the thoughts of the people. You look at the name of Zainab. It is actually a combination of two words, Zainab. Zain means zinat, beauty. Ab means father. So the first granddaughter of the Prophet gets the name Zainab or Zinat-e-Ab, which means the beauty of the father. This was basically to change the mentality of the people. To the extent that Amir al-Mu'minin liked this name so much that according to some of the narrations, he gave this name to both daughters born to Bibi Fatima. Only the distinction was one was known as Zainab-e-Kubra and the other was known as Zainab-e-Sughra, whom we call normally Umm-ul-Kulsum. Salawat pradhne ek baar. And so wherever we see the difference between men and women as far as Islamic laws are concerned, this is not a gender issue, this is more the issue of duties assigned to one or the other, mostly in family context and to some extent even in social context. If you look at the statement I made earlier, that wherever there is difference, it has to do with the duties. This is from Jawadi Amuli. And wherever it comes to the human virtues, there is no difference between the genders in Islam. He actually goes further to say that even if you look at the imamat and nubuwwat and risalat, he says these positions are duties and not fazilat. And because imamat and nubuwwat and risalat are duties assigned to special individuals, therefore you don't see a lady who is Nabi or Imam or a Rasul. But then he goes on to say, if you look at the concept of vilayat, vilayat is not a duty. Vilayat is a fazilat. It is a virtue which cannot be acquired by anyone. It's not something that you can work to acquire the vilayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is bestowed upon those whom He wants. And so he says, if you look at the vilayat, it is not limited to men, like imamat and nubuwwat and risalat. He says you can see. And yes, if you look at the Quran, you will see the example of Maryam. She had kind of a vilayat. Fatema al-Zahra is Waliyatullah al-Uzma for us. And after her, even Zainab is one of the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat upon the Akbar. We cannot hesitate in believing that Zainab had kind of a wilayat, not necessarily same as that of a Ma'soom Imam. Because if you look at the conversation between the Ma'soom Imam, Hussein ibn Ali, who is Sayyid al-Shabab al-Jannah, look at his imamat, look at his ismat, look at his status in the hereafter as one of the Sayyid al-Shabab al-Jannah. And he on the day of Ashura, in the last moment, the last farewell, what does he say to Zainab? He says, Ya ukhta, la tansani fi salat al-layl. O my sister, do not forget me in namaz al-shab. If she is not waliyatullah, then what is she? If a Ma'soom Imam like Hussein bin Ali is asking Zainab that do not forget me in your namaz al-shab. And so this is where we have to realize that when Islam talks about genders, it is not really talking about discrimination. When it comes to virtues and fada'il, both have same potentials. The differences are there when we talk about the duties, especially in family life. Look at the ayat from Surah Nisa, ayat number 43. The earlier words, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. The words are Rijal and Nisa, men and women. But the context of the ayat is clear that Allah is talking about husbands and wives, not men and women in general. What does the ayat say? The husbands are managers of the wives. Qawwam, somebody who manages, who is responsible to take care of the other. And so the word Qawwam here doesn't mean you are the king and you are the owner and the wife is the slave. No. You are responsible for your wife. You have to maintain her. You have to provide for her. Why? Because Allah has given certain qualities to the man in general. We will always get this exception to the rule. But laws are not made according to the exceptions. In general, the difference between men and women in a family context is the issue that women, especially because of their status as mothers, Allah has made them more emotional compared to men who relatively are more rational in their decision making. It's nothing to put one down and elevate the other. No. In a family unit, even if there are two people traveling together as a group, they have to decide from day one who will make the final decision if there is a dispute. And that's what Islam says. In a family life, the husband has been given that task, not because the woman is lesser of a human being. No, it's her emotional issue which is an asset for her as a mother. That is a fazilat for her. Although with the Western media we talk about it, they will say, oh, see, it's talking about the difference now. Even in what is known as popular psychology here, when they talk about men and women, how do they describe them? Mars and Venus, what is that? It's a way of saying they are different. Difference does not necessarily mean one is superior and the other is inferior. No. Their role is different, especially when you look at the position as fathers and mothers. And that is why Islam says it is the husband who is to work and provide for the wife and not the other way around. Especially keeping the concept of motherhood, in the view. And so when we talk about the issue of الرجال قوامون على النساء, that the women are, the husbands are managers of their wives, it doesn't mean they own them and the wives are the slaves. No. Actually, there are only two areas where the wife has to obey the husband. But mahfil is not the place to talk about it. Only two things in Sharia. There is not a third item on which a husband can say, you must obey me. The expectation is that when a marriage takes place, in our culture, it is the bride who is expected to change her lifestyle, in order to be in sync with the husband. The favorite food of the husband, the wife likes something else. You can't force her. It's not even mustahab for her to change her, taste for food because the husband prefers one. No. I will make it more difficult. Sometimes I hear, when the marriages take place, the husband expects the wife to say, now my parents are your parents. MashaAllah, it's said very, beautifully. Well, who told you my parents are your parents? The way it's put, my parents will replace your parents. It doesn't work that way. The real parents are the real parents. The most that the husband can say is that my parents are also like your parents. दिमाग ठीक कर ले, इससे ज़्यादा दादागिरी नहीं चलने वाली है. The most you can say is that my parents are also like your parents. Don't expect the wife to replace her parents with your parents. Your siblings with her siblings. Then we get into problems. Tension, starts right in the beginning. And this is where we have to realize, الرجال قوامون على النساء. They have to provide for them. They have to take care of them. And that's it. It's not an issue of master and slave relationship in Islam. Salawat padhne ek baar aur. As far as Bibi Zainab and her husband Abdullah bin Ja'far is concerned, of course, they were cousins, first cousins. They are from Banu Hashim. And they had this, the blessing of being raised under the Prophet of Islam. And so, of course, they were very much with one another. They lived separate, they had a separate household. They didn't live under the same roof with their parents. No. Abdullah bin Ja'far was blessed with wealth and affluence. In very early stages when he started doing business, Rasulullah saw him once and prayed for him that may Allah give him success in his business. And that dua of Rasulullah covered him till the end of his life. He ended up becoming a very rich person. One of the reasons why you see the shrine of Bibi Zainab in Sham, what was she doing there? One of the reasons given by those historians who believe that that's the true shrine of Bibi Zainab is that Abdullah ibn Ja'far had many properties in the suburb of Damascus, where he used to go and visit just to, manage them and look after them. And this was one of the trips he had taken to Damascus with his wife. And that's where, Bibi Zainab passes away, and that's why we have the shrine of Bibi Zainab in Damascus. And so he was a very affluent person, very well known for his charity. And of course, they had their own household. But Abdullah bin Ja'far knew the closeness between Zainab and Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And he knew Imam Hussain alayhi salam. He respected Imam, not just as a brother-in-law and a cousin, but as the Imam of the time. And so when the time comes for Imam Hussain alayhi salam to leave Medina, and Bibi Zainab decides to go with the brother, Abdullah bin Ja'far didn't have any problem. Because they thought in the same way. They looked at the realities of life in the same way. Just one incident before I go to Urdu. once Abdullah bin Ja'far was in Damascus, he happened to go and see Muawiyah. Not necessarily because he respected him or liked him. These are sometimes the demands of diplomacy or politics. And there Muawiyah started to praise Abdullah in order to put down, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. And he describes him that your father was Sayyid Bani Hashim. And this is what Abdullah bin Ja'far says to Muawiyah, you are wrong in this matter. The Sayyids of Banu Hashim are Al-Hasan wal-Husayn alayhim salatu wassalam. Salawat. And so we see that understanding that Abdullah bin Ja'far had about Ahlul Bayt, especially Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, was very clear. And so when he found out that Imam has now decided to leave Mecca, he goes from Medina all the way to Mecca, and it's that in that trip he takes his two sons, Aun and Muhammad, and he basically leaves them with Imam Hussein alayhi salam to basically represent him in the great sacrifice on the day of Ashura. Salawat pढ़ने एक बार और. मुआविया ने कोशिश तो बहुत की थी कि अब्दुल्ला बिन जाफ़र के ज़रिए बनु हाशिम से करीब आएँ. यह इमाम हुसैन की इमामत का दौर था, चूँकि इमाम जो है तकरीबन 10 साल रहे हैं इमामत के दौर में जब मुआविया ज़िंदा था. एक बार मुआविया ने अपने रिप्रेजेंटेटिव जो मदीना में था उसका मरवान, उसको उसने मैसेज भेजा कि तुम जाओ अब्दुल्ला बिन जाफ़र के पास, उनकी एक बेटी है जिसका नाम है उम्म कुलसूम. ये उम्म कुलसूम अब्दुल्ला और ज़ैनब की बेटी है. अब्दुल्ला बिन जाफ़र के पास जाओ और यजीद के लिए उसका रिश्ता मांगो. वो जाता है मरवान अब्दुल्ला बिन जाफ़र के पास और उसने कहा कि ये पैगाम है मुआविया की तरफ से यजीद के लिए, आपकी बेटी के लिए. उस वक्त आप देखें अब्दुल्ला बिन जाफ़र ने कहा कि देखो बेटी मेरी है लेकिन हमारे ख़ानदान के बुज़ुर्ग हुसैन हैं, मेरी बेटी का फ़ैसला शादी के सिलसिले में हम नहीं करेंगे, ख़ानदान के हमारे जो बुज़ुर्ग जो है हुसैन के पास जाके रिश्ता मांगो. मरवान जाता है इमाम के पास, उसने कहा कि मुआविया ने कहा है कि जो भी महर अब्दुल्ला बिन जाफ़र मांगे वो दे देना, और अब्दुल्ला बिन जाफ़र का अगर जितना भी कर्ज हो उसको भी हम पे ऑफ करेंगे, और ये रिश्ता इंशाअल्लाह दोनों ख़ानदान के लिए सुलह के बुनियाद बनेगी, बनु हाशिम और बनु उमैया में. इमाम हुसैन अलैहि सलाम ने ये मैसेज सुना, लेकिन इमाम भी जानते थे कि इन्होंने जो जुरत की है ये ख़ुद जो है बदतमीज़ी है और इसका जवाब भी ठीक ठाक देना चाहिए. इमाम चाहते तो इग्नोर कर देते, वहीं इनकार कर देते. इमाम ने कहा कि ठीक है मरवान, तुम जिन लोगों को बुलाना चाहते हो कल मस्जिद में आना सबको लेके. वो अपने ख़ानदान वालों को लेके आया, बनु हाशिम वालों को भी कहा कि भाई बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट ओकेजन है. इमाम ने फिर पूछा मरवान क्या है तुम्हारा पैगाम, तो उसने वही तीन बातें की. इमाम ने अपना खुतबा शुरू किया कि जहाँ तक महर की बात जो मुआविया ने की है कि अब्दुल्ला बिन जाफ़र को जितना महर चाहिए दे देना, वो ये नहीं जानता है कि हमारे ख़ानदान के लोग रसूलुल्लाह ने जो अपनी बेटियों के लिए महर तय किया था उससे आगे नहीं जा सकते, ये रसूल के सुन्नत के ख़िलाफ़ होगा. और जहाँ तक अब्दुल्ला के कर्ज़ की अदायगी की बात है कि इस शादी में उनके जितना कर्ज़ा है वो हम पे ऑफ करेंगे, फ़मता क़ज़त निसाउना दुयून आबाइहिन्ना, मरवान मुआविया से जाके कह देना कि हमारे ख़ानदान में बाप का कर्ज़ा जो है बेटी अदा नहीं करती है. یہ تمہارے خاندان کی عادت ہوگی، ہمارے خاندان کی عادت نہیں ہے۔ اور جہاں تک صلح کی بات ہے، تم سمجھتے ہو کہ اس رشتے سے بنو ہاشم و بنو امیہ میں صلح ہو جائے گی؟ ہمارا جھگڑا جو ہے دنیا کے لیے نہیں ہے، دین کے لیے ہے۔ ہمارا اختلاف اللہ کے خاطر ہے، اللہ کے لیے ہے، اور یہ دنیاوی معاملہ ہے، دنیاوی معاملہ میں ہم صلح نہیں کرتے ہیں، اس لیے کہ جھگڑا ہمارے اور تمہارے درمیان اللہ کے خاطر ہے۔ اور پھر ایک اور جملہ مروان نے کہا تھا کہ یزید اتنا اچھا ہے کہ there is nobody compatible to him۔ تو اس وقت امام حسین نے کہا کہ بھائی تمہارے پاس خلافت ہے نا، ہمارے پاس نبوت ہے، ہمارے خاندان میں رسالت اور نبوت ہے، اور اگر تم مانتے ہو کہ رسالت و نبوت خلافت پر فوقیت رکھتی ہے تو تم کبھی یہ مت کرنا کہ یزید جو ہے وہ ہمارے برابر نہیں ہے بلکہ ہم سے بہتر ہے۔ اور آخر میں امام فرماتے ہیں کہ وَقَدْ رَعَيْنَا، اسی گیدرنگ میں پروپوزل مروان لے کے آیا ہے معاویہ کی طرف سے اس کے بیٹی کے لیے، اسی گیدرنگ میں ریفیوزل کے بعد امام کہتے ہیں وَقَدْ رَعَيْنَا أَن نُزَوِّجُهَا مِنْ ابن عَمِّهَا، اور ہم نے ارادہ کیا ہے اور ہم نے ڈیسیشن لیا ہے کہ ام کلثوم بنت عبداللہ اور زینب کا رشتہ اس کے کزن قاسم بن محمد بن جعفر کے ساتھ کریں گے، اسی گیدرنگ میں۔ اور جہاں تک اس کی مہر کا معاملہ ہے، اس کا مہر ہم ادا کریں گے۔ مدینہ کے باہر جو ہمارا گارڈن ہے 10,000 دینار کا، وہ اس کا مہر ہوگا، اور یہ ان کو ہمیشہ کے لیے کافی اور شافی رہے گا۔ صلوات پڑھنا ایک بار اور۔ حسین جانتے تھے جس مقصد سے یہ رشتہ بھیجا گیا تھا اس کا جواب جو ہے پرائیویسی میں نہیں دینا ہے، اور اس وقت جو ہے وہ مروان جو ہے بڑے غصے میں وہاں سے چلا گیا کہ ہم نے تو ہمدردی کی بات کی تھی، رشتے کو جوڑنے کی بات کی تھی، اور آپ نے جو ہے تمام برجز کو جو ہے ہمارے لیے آپ نے توڑ دیا ہے۔ اس وقت امام حسین علیہ السلام نے یہی کہا کہ بھائی تم اگر ہمارے خاندان میں شادی کرو گے تو تمہارے لیے فضیلت ہے، ہمارے لیے فضیلت نہیں ہو سکتی ہے۔ صلوات پڑھنا ایک بار اور۔ خداوند اس قبل بات قبول فرما، ہمارے گناہوں کو معاف فرما، ہمارے توفیقات میں اضافہ فرما۔ خداوندہ ہمیں ہمیشہ ان لوگوں میں سے قرار دے جو قرآن اور سیرت اہل بیت پر اپنی زندگی کو بسر کرتے ہیں، اور ہمیشہ ان لوگوں میں سے قرار دے جو قرآن کی تعلیمات سے وفادار ہیں، اور زمانے کے پروپیگنڈا سے ہم لوگ اپنے ایمان خصوصاً قرآن پر ایمان جو ہے اس کو متزلزل نہ بنانا۔ امام کے ظہور میں تعجل فرما۔ ربنا تقبل منا انک انت السمیع العلیم۔